Okay, everybody, welcome to today's virtual training live on November 29th, all the way to December 3rd, 2021 at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Carlise Anthony. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center, and it's my pleasure to host you guys here with Ms. Cheryl as well. Our Training and Development Manager, Crystal Cedino, was with you guys yesterday, and she'll join us again tomorrow. Now, before we begin this session, we do have to do a disclaimer. This virtual training provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes that we set. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable to your particular situations. So just be mindful of that, but please do feel free to ask questions in the chat box as we go along. Now, before we begin, we want to make sure that we see all of the different features so that you know how to maneuver throughout the presentation. So if you are on the web browser of Microsoft Teams, if you hover your mouse, you're going to be able to see this little bar pop up, and you'll see where you can turn on and off your camera. We do appreciate cameras on to make this as engaging as possible and see your faces and see how you're going through the course. To mute and unmute yourselves, we are going to keep you muted until the period for questions. But please do, like I mentioned before, feel free to pop those questions into the chat box. I'll be monitoring it, and I'll make sure Cheryl addresses them. And then you'll see the chat function as well pop up. If you are on the desktop app, you're going to see the same bar, same features, but it's going to be on your top right corner next to the leave button, okay? So you'll see the ability to turn on and off your camera, mute and unmute yourself, and the chat box option as well. And this is our agenda for today. We're going to go over some of the materials that Cheryl discussed. So Cheryl, I'm going to pass it off to you because you are the expert here, and let you take over. So let me stop presenting here. There we
go. Can you see that?
Not yet.
No. Okay, Cora, hold on then.
You want me to shut this back?
Back up to screen.
There we go.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, guys, we're on day 2. Welcome and good afternoon. I already did my smudging. Here's my information if anybody needs it. I have it at the beginning and the end of the presentations. This is brought to you courtesy of the Native Learning Center, and we are being recorded. My name is Cheryl. My Anishinaabe name is Redbird Woman. I'm Loon Clan, and I come from Place of the Pike, Bay Mills. Bay Mills is a reservation located at the top of Michigan. Our waters border Canada, and we are Ojibwe Chippewa people. I was director of housing for my tribe for 28 years, and I was also honored to serve as the chairwoman of the National American Indian Housing Council for 4 years. I also served as the vice chair and the secretary for an additional 12 years. When I wasn't serving on the board of NIHC, I served as the chairwoman for the Great Lakes, the 31 tribes that surround these areas, Ohio and Minnesota, Wisconsin, Indiana, Michigan. So that's what I did during my housing stint. And then I became a TNTA provider 2.5 years ago. So our course structures, presentation, there's a couple of exercises throughout there, not much. Participant material, I would encourage you to look at the material, maybe download it. You might not think you would need it now, but you could use it in the future. We have examples and references. And as Cora said, always verify that the forms are up to date or The procurement policy right now is the one that HUD is using. But always go in because things change from time to time. So questions, if you could jot down your questions or put them in the chat box. I don't look at the chat box when I'm teaching. But she'll let me know when there's something there, and then we have a question and answer period at the end also. So the objective is hopefully to help you with your understanding of management and operations in relation to procurement, improve your proficiency and capabilities, job skills when it comes down to procurement functions, and to assist you as a recipient to conduct your procurement and comply with all of the guidelines, the uniform requirements at 2 CFR Part 200. So hopefully we'll give you some tools to make it a little bit easier. It will cover the administrative requirements during the course. You'll learn different ways to conduct procurement effectively and efficiently. We'll discuss some of the skills required to perform those responsibilities in relationship to that. There's varying there's procurement experts probably in this class that know more than I do, that could be teaching it. It depends on how many years they've got under their belt, and and I always uh, to look out to those people that get the opportunity to practice that every day. And as we talked about yesterday, depending upon the size of your Indian housing organization, whether it be tribally, a TDHE, or if you're a housing authority, whatever, a housing department. And I've seen them from 3 people in them all the way up to 50 and 60 with whole big procurement staffs. And they're normally the one, when you have staff that big, you usually have the money, and the more money you have, the more procurement is involved. So it varies. So today we're gonna talk about some of the standards of conduct, conflict of interest in the administration of contracts. Conflict of interest is required in 2 different parts of our policies. Specifications and statements of work, cost estimates, determining contract types, and we're gonna start hitting on some of the different methods of procurement. As I said, there's quite a few items within the appendix documents. There's, an environmental review flow chart. Don't do anything without making sure your environmentals are done, or you're gonna, you'll get spanked. The micro purchase threshold, when that got raised in 2019, you've got the guidance in there. Your Indian preference policy, there's a qualification application that you could use if you don't have all your Indian preference things together. A determination letter that you can send out, because you have to, when somebody applies for Indian preference, you have to say, just like when somebody applies for housing, you have to say, yes, you meet our qualifications, or no, you don't. And that letter's there to help you with that. There's a procurement glossary. These first three have links in them. If you get nothing else out of the course, grab those 3 things and put those on your desktop. Be able to know when it cites a number, where to go to be able to find that number. If it's a 1,000, it'd be under that, that 3rd appendix item. If it starts with 200, it would be under this 1st appendix item. But so grab those while you're here. There's 29 different things in here that'll hopefully, help you. A sample RFP, using fax or mail, a lump sum fax or mail. There's a procurement checklist for your procurement files. Okay, we're going to set up my procurement files. These are things that should be in here. The HUD sample procurement policy. There's an example ethics policy, because you should have that in there. A sample procurement contract file arrangement. These are the ways that you should arrange your files. So look at that stuff if you get a chance. There's various checklists in there, and there's different guidances that we still have to follow. And Davis-Bacon. This one is an actual older document, but sometimes we'll go 20 years without them updating a document. And this is one of the times where, there's not really a lot of new information on it, but we need to make sure that we know about Davis-Bacon. So, standards of conduct. Where I'm at, like I said yesterday, got a foot and a half of snow out here. With this cold comes those skies. So we get a lot of real good, because we're very rural, shots of the sky and northern lights. So you'll see that a lot in my pictures, and in my slides. So you have to have standards of conduct. Since the awarding of those contracts, by our housing recipients involves the expenditure of federal funds, your employees, your contractors are held to a higher standard of conduct than those who work with private contracts. Um, to maintain confidence that the housing recipient's procurement process is fair, it's essential that you have standards of conduct that are maintained at all times. Your employees and your board members, tribal council and your housing board, must carry out their duties impartially to ensure fairness. They should conduct themselves in a manner, as to promote confidence in the integrity of your organization. Any attempt by an employee or a board member to realize personal gain, by contact inconsistent with proper procurement procedures should be a breach of the housing standards, of conduct. So, disclosure of confidential information to any person who is not authorized by your contracting officer, who we discussed pretty much in depth yesterday, to receive such information should actually be considered a breach of ethical standards. Confidential information includes, but is not necessarily limited to, the contents of a bid prior to your bid opening, um, or a proposal prior to you awarding that contract, using a competitive proposal, names and individuals of firms that submitted bids prior to a bid opening, or proposals prior to a contract award. Now, one of the things that I would warn you to do, I told you all about what I did. So I was obviously gone from my office quite a bit, while I was there. And I had an assistant director, and you can't make assumptions that somebody coming in knows the right way to do things. Um, you can't be an expert in everything. I had a situation where I had bid openings, and I said, make sure you date them, you sign them, you put them on this desk. You're going to get them. They'll be coming. They could come in all during the week or whatever. And this was a small one. It's like painting, of some of our rental units. Um, I came back and it was like, we're going to get some good bids. This one came in, and I said, this guy, he beat you, by thousands of dollars, and I kind of did the double take. Well, what do you mean? And had to re-advertise the whole thing, notify everybody that I had sent it out to, everybody that I'd resent, and had to explain, you don't open up bids. You leave them sealed, you leave them stamped who did, and you never discuss a bid. You never tell anybody who else is bidding, and you never share what the bid amounts are. That was my bad. I assumed that they knew better. Um, and it's happened in a couple of different situations over time that I've been told, So make sure that when it comes to bidding and things like that, even the secretary or whoever is receiving that stuff at the front end knows the importance and the necessary steps. So that confidential information just doesn't go all the way up to the director and your board members that are, slicing them open. Sometimes the mistakes happen before that. So that was my big bad. Um, and I rebid it, and it cost me about a month's time. But it was a mistake years and years and years ago, but it still obviously sits with me. So just make sure that everybody involved that could possibly touch anything knows the appropriate protocols, I guess. So, your Indian Housing Authority generated information that's related to a procurement, including your cost estimates, your contractor selections, evaluation plans, specifications, before your solicitation is issued, and any information that the disclosure of which would have a direct bearing upon the award of that contract or on that competitive process. You're not supposed to let that out. It's a breach of ethical conduct for any current or former employee, officer, or agent to knowingly use confidential information for actual or anticipated personal gain, or for actual or anticipated personal gain of any other person. I also we have a tribal council that roll over every 2 years on my reservation. I had one that used to put in for shoveling of my apartment buildings. We get huge amounts, and depending upon if it's a bad year, you can, lose a lot of properties if you don't get them shoveled. So that was something that we would put out for bid all the time. Well, one of the people that quite often would bid that became a tribal councilman. So he comes in and he slaps, he says, "Hey, here's for the bid." And I said, "You're really not supposed to be bidding on this. You're a tribal councilman, I said I would rather not do it. We could discuss it with the board or whatever, but you now have access to the budgets." And as it turned out, he bowed away gracefully. Probably wouldn't have had to, but I would have called the HUD office and asked. It was just too close for comfort for me and my gut at that time. So for those 2 years he served on the council, he didn't do any additional work for the housing authority. But keep in mind things like that also. So it's a breach of ethical conduct for any current or former employee, officer, or agent to knowingly use that information for anything that could be personal gain or perceived as. So upon discovery of any actual or potential conflict of interest, an employee, officer, commissioner, agent is supposed to actually file a written statement of disqualification, and they should be withdrawing from any participation in that transaction. Get them totally away from it so they don't know. Did you say something, Cora? No. Okay. So a prohibition against selling to the recipient. Now, this used to be a thing. It isn't at this point anymore. So even though it's no longer prohibited, it's still a good practice not to allow a present or a formal employee or a board member of your recipient to engage in selling or attempting to sell supplies, construction, or other services, like I said, roof shoveling or whatever, to the recipient for 1 year following the date that employment ended. It's just things to protect yourself and the way things look. So there's a 1 year prohibition that a lot of housing authorities put in place. And the wording for that is usually during his tenure, and it should be his or her, and for 1 year thereafter, no commissioner, officer, employee of the authority, any member of the governing body of the tribe, so it goes out to your councilman, or any other public official who exercises any responsibilities or functions with regard to the project shall voluntarily acquire any interest, direct or indirect, in any project or property included or planned to be included in on any project or any contract proposed relating to any project, unless prior to that acquisition they disclose his or her interest in writing to the authority. And such disclosure is entered upon the minutes of the authority. So you've got, in your board meeting minutes. And the commissioner, officer, employee shall not participate in any action that the authority undertakes relating to that property or contract in which they have such interest. Any commissioner, office, or employee of the authority involuntarily acquires any such interest, or voluntarily or involuntarily acquired any such interest prior to their appointment, so ahead of time, the commissioner, officer, or employee in such event shall immediately disclose their interest in writing to the authority, and such disclosure shall be entered upon the minutes of the authority, and the commissioner or employee or officer shall not participate in any action relating to that property or contract. That really, takes, if you're doing anything with land purchasing that any of your board members or staff or their family own. Any violation of those foregoing provisions of that section shall constitute misconduct in office. So that's what they would be charged with. This section shall not be applicable to the acquisition of any interest and obligations of the authority issued in connection with any project or to the execution of agreements by banking institutions for the deposit of handling of funds in connection with a project, or as to act as a trustee under any trust indenture, or to utility services, the rates for which are fixed or controlled by a governmental agency, or to membership on the board. But you should have something in there that have to do with ethics and your board members and your staff. So conflict of interest in the admission of contracts. It's when somebody basically in the position of trust has a competing professional or personal interest. When they make a decision in an official capacity and they stand to profit personally. And when your interests have potential to conflict with the best interest of your organization or those people that you actually represent. So when you go into the 200 book under 318C1, a non-federal entity must maintain written standards of conduct covering conflicts of interest and governing the performance of your employees engaged in the selection, award, or the administration of contracts. No employee, officer, or agent can participate in that selection, award, or administration of a contract supported by that award if they have any real or apparent conflict of interest. Such conflict would arise when the employee, the officer or agent, and then it actually extends to their immediate family, their partner, their organization, or anybody that's going to employ them, or is about to employ any of the parties indicated herein, if they have a financial or other interest in a tangible personal benefit from a firm considered for a contract. The officers, employees, agents must neither solicit or accept gratuities, favors of anything of monetary value from contractors or parties to subcontracts. However, non-federal entities can set standards for situations with that financial interest is not substantial or the gift is unsolicited, items of nominal value. The standards of conduct have to provide for disciplinary action. So you make sure that when you write those standards of conduct, you see the disciplinary action portion in there to be applied for violations of such standards by your officers, employees, or agents. Now, so this one can vary. I've seen it go from $20 to $100. An employee can accept, and then this is an employee can accept food or refreshments of a nominal value on an infrequent occasion as the ordinary course of a breakfast, luncheon, or dinner meeting, or other meeting where an employee could be properly in attendance, or maybe may accept unsolicited advertising material, such as pens, calendars, or other items of a nominal value. Now, this came from my housing authority. Quite a few people within the Great Lakes use this writing. This is what I will call the NIHC Amerind language. It's quite common to go to our conventions and you see pins and, I could probably look around my desk and find, there's a letter opener from NIHC at one of the conventions, one of those nominal items. Where the food would come into play is it would be common. A lot of people use Amarin in different insurance agencies, and there could be a table full of people, and all of a sudden the check is picked up. 90% of the people sitting at that table are their customers, so they will do something like that. This language would allow that to happen without any fear of repercussion from any of the staff that are sitting there. So that's why that language is in there written like that. Now, it can go a little bit further in depth. This one's the highest that I've seen. An employee shall not solicit or accept directly or indirectly any gift exceeding $100 in value. Gratuity, favor, loan, or anything of monetary value from a person or an organization who has in the past or tends to seek to obtain a contractual business or financial relationship with ATHA. Now that's what I use when I write. That's any tribal housing association. Or who has interest which may be affected by the performance or the non-performance of an employee's official duties. Now I have a couple of little stories here. What would be a non-performance? Well, a non-performance could be the gentleman that I had employed to serve as the building inspector of sorts for the housing entity. That would be non-performance. If he was gifted quite a few things from a contractor, they might be tempted to let a few more things go. So that would be a non-performance example. This is another area that sits with me where I made a mistake over the years. I didn't think I did, but it was pointed out where it could have been. My maintenance guys absolutely love them, you know. And one of my vendors said, hey, he came in the one day, he said, I got some shirts. Can you guys wear them for, working so they can ruin them or whatever, They had the logo of the lumber company on the back or the building supplier. So these guys would wear them around rather than ruin their clothes or whatever. I didn't think anything bad of it. I mean, they probably bought them for $10, $15. The majority was the hoodies is what they liked in the winter because of this stuff. Until I put something out for bid and there was different lumber yards building on it. And one of my staff said, hey, one of the guys went walking by and they're advertising a lumber yard who is going to be bidding on this product. Now, if I was another lumber yard and I came in to submit my bid and would have seen one of the staff, wearing that shirt, I would have thought a little bit different about putting in my bid. That might have been a perceived conflict of interest. But so be careful, it's cheap. You're doing something for your guys, but if they're ever going to bid on anything, it could look like you're giving them favor. I guess that would be the story that I'm kind of sharing with you as far as that goes. So the code of conduct for a conflict of interest. The Any Tribal Indian Housing Authority prohibits its officers, employees, or agents from participating directly or indirectly in the selection or the award of admission of any contract if conflict, real or apparent, would be involved. Such conflict would arise when a financial or other interest is in a firm selected for award is held by an officer, an employee, or an agent involved in making that award. His or her relative, including father, mother, son, daughter, brother, sister. This is the point that you're going to need. If you don't have it already, you're going to have to make a definition of what immediate family is for your housing entity. I've seen it all the way to first cousin, but on my reservation, if it would have said first cousin to me at one time, I had 29. That would have been a lot. And in some of the policies, they want to know how you're going to, in the admissions policies, you're supposed to set forth kind of how you're going to make sure that there's no conflict of interest. And one of the steps is, do you know who the family of the decision makers are? And I thought, really, every 2 years I would have to go through and figure out who all these people are and compared to my tribal council? That'd be a lot of work. So I took that step out of mind. But I had to have a definition and I didn't include first cousin. But the rule of thumb that I tend to see used is if you're going to give somebody bereavement leave, a 4-day paid bereavement leave, that's kind of your definition of what an immediate family is. So his or her relative, including a father, a mother, a son, a daughter, a brother, a sister, your uncle, aunt, nephew, niece, husband, wife, father-in-law, mother-in-law, son-in-law, daughter-in-law. These are kind of what your immediate family is. Stepdaughter, stepbrother, stepsister, half-brother. His or her partner always has to be in there, even if it's not by marriage. And then like an organization which employs, they want that, negotiating to employ or has an arrangement concerning of prospective employment of anybody above. So the Any tribal Indian housing authority prohibits its officers and employees from soliciting or accepting gratuities, favors, anything of monetary value other than those unsolicited items of nominal intrinsic value from contractors, potential contractors, and parties to subcontracts. The knowing use of confidential information for actual or anticipated personal gain. This is when you write down what your violation is. It's got to be a written, 200 makes you put that definition in writing, what you're going to do about a violation. So, a disciplinary action will be taken to remedy violations of this code and may include verbal or a written warning, formal reprimand, suspension, or dismissal. The level of the disciplinary action will depend on the severity of the violation, the individual's prior behavior, and or the nature of the individual's position. Notice that the NA Tribal Indian Housing Authority communicates the requirements of this code during orientations, trainings, in the bylaws of the Board of Commissioners, and its personnel and procurement policies. You're always supposed to let them know how you communicate any type of an infraction or law or policy of that type to your staff. Same thing with your drug-free workplace policy and things like that. So 1030, the prohibitions regarding conflict of interest, what are applicable? So applicability in the procurement of supplies, equipment, other property and construction services by your recipients and subrecipients. The provisions found under 200-318 shall apply. So that's where you would look. In all cases not governed by 318, the following provisions of this section would apply. Conflicts prohibited. Again, all the way back, and it's the same language over and over. No person who participates in the decision-making process gains inside information with regard to NAHASDA assisted activities can obtain a personal or financial interest or benefit from those activities, except for the use of funds to pay salaries, because that's allowable, or any other related administrative cost. Such persons include anyone with an interest in any contract, subcontract, agreement, or proceeds thereunder, either for themselves or others, with whom they have business or immediate family ties. Immediate family ties are determined by the Indian tribe or the TDHE within their operating policies. So this is a code of conduct monitoring checklist. When you do your self-monitoring before you do your APR, when it comes to procurement, you could, slide this in the file, and this could be part of your procurement checklist. And it would be, for your code of conduct. Is there any indication that there's an appropriate action on the part of the tribe or the THE or the contractor? Either an individual or an organizational conflict of interest standpoint. If the answer is yes, you should determine the severity of the problem and take action accordingly. Is there any indication that the statement of work could be restrictive? This is another area. If the answer is yes, the statement of work should be corrected. And the RFP amended or canceled as appropriate. Has there been any protest or hints of improprieties from any outside sources when it comes to procurement or conflict of interest? If the answer is yes, the validity must be determined and actions taken accordingly. Any appearance of conflicts of interest relating to the proposed contractual action. Have cost and technical evaluation committee members evaluating proposals under a competitive negotiation procedure signed a statement confirming, in fact, that they are members of an immediate family and that they have no interest in the companies being evaluated. So as part of your technical evaluation committees, they want, that other layer saying that you're not evaluating anybody that's within your family. Has brand name or equal been used excessively in similar situations or solicitations that could be interpreted as leading to a conflict of interest situation? If the answer is yes, the work specification, if possible, should be expanded in order to achieve more competition. So these are some of the things under code of conduct and conflict of interest within procurement that you could put in your self-monitoring. So procurement, you should try to plan for your procurement as far in advance as you can. In places like this, you do your planning this time of the year. So as soon as the load limits are off, you can hit the ground running because you've got such a short season. And in places like Florida, you can build year round, so you don't have a lot of those same difficulties. 2 to 3 months before you put forth your Indian housing plan, and before it's due, that the director um, should try to start identifying your upcoming needs as far as supplies for the next year, services. What kind of construction are you going to do? You're going to have recurring needs. In this area, it would be office supplies every year, snow plowing, snow shoveling every year, pest control, perhaps. So those are, kind of built in, and you should have an average of what in a normal year that those items would be. Planning for that procurement, depending on the level of your development and construction, your needs and your resources are really going to vary. There's some places that don't get enough money to build, very, very rarely, unless, money should come down the pipeline like right now. There's other places where they get enough funding through their formula to build continually. So they're in a constant state of procurement. But when they're like that, they usually also have the procurement staff, hopefully, to facilitate that. This is going to be dependent on your staff size. If you have qualified, experienced staff with procurement experience, or if you need to bring in your architect and your engineer. When you're at a small housing authority, hire those people that know what they're doing. There's no shame in that. Get them on board as soon as you can. Make sure that they're procured properly. And then you have an expert, that'll help you. Procurement is not something you gamble with. You're going to have several things you need to determine, what kind of construction method are you going to use? I dabbled in force account at one time. One of the things I discovered with force account is it's pretty much like the rest of the tribe. If there's a funeral or whatever, you're going to lose all of your crew. They're going to be going to the funeral or whatever. If that's a construction crew hired from somewhere else, that's not going to phase them, and work is not going to stop. So, you have to have those discussions among your, are we here to employ our people? Are we here to build houses in the most economical fashion? You have to have those conversations, because force account is quite different than a commercial crew. You're going to do your conventional contracting. Are you going to do a design build? Are you going to acquire, a turnkey? Things like that. Timing. How long do you have? What are the steps? Did you say something? Nope, must have just had a live mic, hey? How long to complete the steps to award a contract? Funding. What's the estimated cost of that contract? Your solicitation and your evaluation. How should that procurement be advertised? Are there potential contractors that should be solicited? I know in the Oklahoma regions, Sweehaw, and different places like that, they did really, really well with the regional housing entities, and they would have lists. It was something that I would love to see mimicked through the United States. These are reputable contractors that have dealt in Indian country, and so you could have shared lists, so you could send your invitations out, or send your materials out to a larger base of people. What is the estimated cost of that contract? Your solicitation and evaluation. Like I said, how are you going to advertise it? For how long? Don't make the mistake of not advertising things for a long enough period. Are there potential contractors that should be solicited? Is there an adequate statement of work, a SOW, available? Do you know what you're going to advertise? What kind of contract is appropriate? So a SOW, or a statement of work specifications. It kind of describes the development of specifications and statements or scopes of work along with their uses. Properly and prepared or described specifications and statements of work that prove to enhance your competition, clarify the relationship between the contractor and the housing entity, resulting in an improved contract administration, hopefully. All procurement transactions should be conducted in a manner that provides for full and open competition. So it's fair to everybody, and you seek as many bidders as you can. In compliance with that requirement, your specifications and statements of work have to be designed so as they don't restrict competition to one supplier. So you have to write them a certain way. I can't just, I'll come across an example in a minute. Your definition, a specification is a detailed description of your materials, supplies, equipment, pre-cuts, construction work, that's used in your procurement process to tell prospective contractors precisely what you are desiring as your housing entity to purchase. That statement of work is a unique type of specification generally used for the procurement of professional and or management services. There's different specification types. 3 general types of specifications are used when you're preparing a contract for equipment, supplies, and construction. Functional and performance specifications, design specifications, and brand name or equal specifications. Well, these general types are described. It's really rare to find a specification that fits just into one of those holes or those categories. Most specs actually contain a combination of design and performance requirements and could include brand name or equal. You always should have that equal in there, brand name or equal, descriptions of your components. So functional and performance specifications. Those specifications contain performance characteristics that are desired for your item that identify how that item functions. The detailed design or exact measurements aren't stated within that. A functional or performance specification is really risky to use. Performance specifications state the overall requirements so that each contractor can furnish its own item to meet your required performance. And there's the example I was looking for. For example, you're going to bid out a new boiler. The specification can simply call for a gas-fired hot water boiler that'll produce 100,000 British thermal units, so 100,000 BTU per hour. It's easy to imagine a gas-fired boiler that can produce 100,000 BTU, but it might require continuous and costly maintenance. So that would be a risky way just to bluntly ask for that. So then there's something called the design specification. Design specs contain a description of the item desired as opposed to how you want that item to perform, as opposed to a performance standard. Design specs can be as detailed as needed, as you want them to be. Depending on the nature of the item, the design spec can contain precise measurements, tolerances, materials, product test, quality control, and other detailed information, provided that competition is not being limited to one product. That's where you're going to ask for your or equivalent. The information furnished in the spec should be sufficiently detailed to ensure that all the items manufactured to that specification will virtually be the same. A detailed description of kitchen cabinets giving dimensions, fastening details, materials, and hardware is one example of that type of specification. Then there's brand name or equal specification. Under that form of a spec, clear and accurate product descriptions are developed. The descriptions shouldn't contain features that unduly, again, restrict that competition. You're not allowed to do that. It may be necessary to describe technical requirements for materials and equipment by referencing brand name products in order to define performance or other requirements. References to brand names shall be followed by the words "or equal" and a description of the item's essential characteristics so that the competition is not restricted. Specific brand names can be used only for establishing design and quality standards, and only if there's no other reasonable method of designating that required quality of that item desired. When brand names or catalogs are used, inform the offerers that such references established only design or quality standard. In fact, other products that clearly and demonstratingly meet those standards are also considered acceptable. So you always brand name or equal. Standardizing inventory. This is one thing that I tried so hard. If you guys are going to buy doors, buy the same size door. Make them so the wheelchair can fit through there. Try to get, 3-4 the same window size. It makes life so much easier when you're 3-4 hours away from other products. But many housing entities, for efficiency, try to standardize their inventory of equipment and parts. You have to comply with procurement standards that require full and open competition and prohibit using specifications that unduly restrict that competition. To standardize your inventory, specifications or descriptions that use brand names or may be used only when accompanied, like I said before, by that term "or equal." The specific features of the product design, functional or performance, that are essential in order to be considered "or equal" shall be clearly stated. In addition to the brand name product specified, any other product that meets the same technical requirements shall be given full and fair consideration. In all cases, your Indian housing entity should give all offerers the opportunity to present reasons or data showing that their product can meet your standard requirements, your stated requirements, whatever you put out, Descriptions or specifications shall not be written so as to specify a particular product or feature of a product particular to one manufacturer, with the exception, unless that feature or product is critical to the intended use. So, avoiding manufacturer specifications. You should avoid incorporating a particular manufacturer's specifications as the project spec. It gives the appearance, or it could give the appearance, that you're restricting the competition, basically, and suggests that other manufacturers' products are at a disadvantage and might not be accepted. If your housing entity specifies a brand name cabinet, the essential key elements or features of that product should be stated. For example, if you're specifying kitchen cabinets with the key features of solid wood doors, plywood frames, then any available brand and styles of cabinets would hopefully meet that key criteria. Therefore, all of the brands would be acceptable. Contractor developed specifications. In order to ensure objective contractor performance, to eliminate unfair competitive advantage, contractors funded to develop or draft specifications, requirements, SOW, statements of works, your invitations for bid, your RFPs, your requests for proposals. They have to be excluded from competing within that procurement. You can't let somebody write the specs and then turn around and let them bid on it. The only exception to that rule is if prior to the solicitation, all respondents to the solicitations are provided with materials and information made available to the contractor involved in manners pertinent to that solicitation. But I would not recommend even going down that hole. So a statement of work, your SAL. The adequacy and the detail of the SAL can affect the number of offerers or people that are going to be willing and able to respond. If it's not specific enough, people might not do it because they're afraid about the uncertainty or the risk. That's an inherent risk when it's not specific enough and you're bidding on something and then you find out later on, either because of the uncertainty about the risk or involved or because they may not understand the relationship of the requirement to their own capability, basically. To clarify and specific detail of your requirements presented in the SAL, make sure they directly relate to the amount of the offer and the quality of the proposal submitted. If it's well written, if it's clearly identified and anybody can make sense of it, you're going to have more people bid on it. Under a competitive proposals method, your SAL establishes your conclusive baseline task that are the foundation for your evaluation criteria. It plays a significant role in your evaluation, your proposal evaluation, and how you're going to select that contractor. It becomes a standard for measuring contractor performance. And when a question arises over an apparent increase in the scope of work, the SAL is a baseline document for resolving those questions. Negotiation of cost and schedule modifications could be impaired, if not rendered impossible, if that SAL is not definitive within those areas. Alternatively, some solicitations could include the actual contract, which is summarized or referenced within your statement of work. So a statement or scope of work is normally used for contracts for services such as accounting or payroll services, energy audits, consultants, legal and AE services, as well as non-professional services such as maintenance and groundkeeping. Purpose and functions of the SAL, the primary purpose is to provide a basis for a mutual understanding between your contracting officer and your offerer and any subsequent contractor of what the requirements of your housing entity are. Elements, the particular issues to be addressed are going to vary with the nature of the purpose, the size, the complexity of the work. At a minimum, every SAL should include detailed work and task requirements, what you want as an end result and your deliverables, including the criteria which a deliverable has to be or must be met to be considered acceptable, delivery schedules and periods of performance, any reporting and compliance requirements, a precise statement of your objectives, contact information for who's dealing with that for your housing entity, the contract administrator, and other special considerations, warranties, personnel required, classifications, any type of testing procedures, procedural safeguards. So writing a statement of work can be very, very complex. If you have developed an outline, getting the words down on paper can even be difficult. A good starting point is writing a draft that concentrates basically on your ideas of what you need to be, to have done. You begin by describing your requirements without worrying about the format or the language. And the goal would be to get your ideas down on that paper. After describing your requirements, go back, refine the draft by concentrating on the format and the language. Ensure that the finished statement of work clearly describes what has to be accomplished, not how to do it. Use how-to instructions only as a necessary to ensure that the contractor is basically headed in that correct direction. So the other one of these pieces of puzzles is an independent cost estimate. And you can read about those at 2 CFR 200-324. But before soliciting for bids or proposals, the non-federal entity has to perform a cost or a price analysis, basically in connection with every procurement action in excess of your simple acquisition threshold, including contract modifications. The method and the degree of analysis is dependent upon the facts surrounding the particular procedures and that particular procurement situation. But as a starting point, the non-federal entity has to make independent estimates before receiving bids or proposals, considered confidential information with need-to-know access. That's one of those, protected things. That ICE is your estimate of the cost and the goods or services to be acquired under a contract or a modification. It serves as your yardstick for evaluating the reasonableness of the contractor's proposed cost or price, that you're getting in. So it helps your contracting officer determine contracting method to be used, because that's dependent upon, for example, if the cost can be estimated with a high degree of confidence in your accuracy, you might be able to do it by sealed bid. So while the contracting officer is responsible for the preparation of an independent cost estimate, other personnel, your end user, your budget, your finance, are usually involved. They may actually do most of that preparation. Your housing entity can develop your ICE using their own employees, outside parties, consultants, combination of the two. If any outside party, whether you're compensating them or not, assist in developing that ICE, you have to take those appropriate steps again to ensure that that organizational conflict doesn't occur. Normally, you don't let them bid on it, but they can obtain any competitive advantage from advanced knowledge of what that cost estimate, what you think you're going to end up paying. So your contracting officer should prepare or have prepared an ICE commensurate with your purchasing requirement. The level of detail will depend on the dollar value of your proposed contract and the nature of the goods or the services to be acquired. Your ICE must be prepared prior to your solicitation of any of your offers, and the requirements are for micro purchasing, the contracting officer generally does not need to prepare an ICE. Price reasonableness normally will be based on a comparison with historical prices that you paid for that item, or you can use a commercial catalog, internet, or other offers. For purchases above your micro purchase amount, but less than your small purchase threshold, documentation should be kept to a minimum. The ICE can be based on prior purchases, commercial catalogs, internet, detailed analysis, purchases for those services in the past. For purchases above your small purchase threshold, the level of detail will vary, but should be commensurate with the size or the dollar value or the complexity and the commercial nature of that requirement. Their ICEs are not normally broken out to major categories of cost: labor, materials, profit, and other direct costs such as travel, overhead, and profit. Commercially available products and services can require less detail, as the marketplace tends to provide current reliable pricing information for products that are commercial and readily available on the market. Your housing entity may not need to break out components. Non-commercial type requirements and work designed specifically for your housing entity will require more of it'll be more extensive. It's got to be a bigger, more thorough estimation and product and detailed ICE. It serves as your primary in-house gauge of cost, price reasonableness, and it shouldn't be relied upon basically at the exclusion of other sources of price information. Market conditions can fluctuate, and we kind of talked about this a little bit yesterday. And in the day of COVID, the price of materials tripled in some places. What you would look at as common for 6 months ago might have, so that would have been thrown out the window. Your market conditions can actually fluctuate between the time that you prepare that and by the time you get it bid out. I imagine that happened to probably 3/4 of our housing entities out there. We went into lockdown, we shut down offices, we had things that were on the block, all priced out, ready to go. And we didn't meet any of it. So, materials or labor costs, if they've increased, or even decreased, if a significant period of time has elapsed, you can know that those market conditions have changed, and your contracting officer should almost redo that ice, so you have something more current. And call your HUD people. We had I come from the Eastern Woodlands. Some of the finest people, they were there to help. And if they didn't know how to do anything, they would say, I don't know how to do this. Why don't you ask this guy? And after a few years, those would be the first people we would reach out to. And if they couldn't get an answer, they'd find one, so establish those relationships. Documentation, information regarding contractor selection or rejection. Remember, like I told you, just like a housing application, when you reject people, you have to notify them and you have to have it in writing why. Same thing for your Indian preference, including where applicable, the negotiation memo, the source selection panel, evaluation report, cost, price analysis, email correspondence, including offers, selections, pertinent pre and post award discussions, negotiations, basis for what your contract price is going to be, contract administration issues that you experience or actions that you've taken. And the level of documentation should actually be commensurate with the value of the procurement. You don't go through all those steps for something that's a couple of $1,000s in value. If it's a couple of $100,000 in value, you should have triple the paperwork almost. So remember that the more money you spend, the more paperwork you need. The cost estimate, an independent cost or price analysis, in connection with every procurement action in excess of your simplified acquisition threshold of $250,000, including purchasing of standard or recurring items, is to be completed before receiving bids or your proposals. The cost estimate serves as a basis for budgeting, checking both the adequacy of the statement of work, the credibility of the bids proposed by your prospective contractors. Prior to contract award, your estimate can be used to assess the feasibility of proceeding with that procurement. You might be thinking you're going to spend $100,000 and it looks like everything is going to come in at almost $200,000. Well, you're not going to have enough money. Once that contract has been awarded, the cost estimate can be used to help monitor project expenditures. The method and degree of analysis, again, is dependent upon the facts surrounding that particular and type of procurement situation that you have. So in most cases, outside information sources are needed. When you prepare that cost estimate, be aware that information provided from the contractor or subcontractor or supplier could potentially provide them with an unfair competitive advantage. So you'd go to 2 CFR and you'd look under 319 to read a little bit more about that. So you kind of be cautious if you're going to ask somebody to bid on them to call and get your basis of what your amounts you think are going to be. Your total estimate, the amount should be accurate, an accurate estimate of the maximum cost of the requested procurement. When the requirement is for services, that cost estimate should be realistic, hopefully, of what it's going to cost to get a contractor to complete that work, given reasonable economy and efficiency. When the requirement is for supplies and equipment, the estimate should represent what the competitive price should be based on a review of price history, documentation for the same or similar items. I mean, if you're going to buy drywall, 150, it's good. Some things are repetitive and you have a very good idea what it should cost you. Whenever feasible, the cost estimate should be accompanied by a breakdown of your cost elements. The cost information is important because it provides a basis for contracting steps as determining what contract type to use, evaluating bids, cost proposals, conducting negotiations with your offerers. The cost breakdown should generally include an estimate for each task or phase, including your direct cost, personnel, equipment, supplies, travel, your indirect cost, overhead, general, administrative expenses, and profit and fees. You have to have the following information to accurately estimate cost. You need basically a cost database specialist who prepares your cost estimates. Should use an up-to-date cost database in preparing accurate and reliable cost estimates. Details of that estimate. Every estimate may not call for detailed line items, but every estimator must know how to prepare a detailed estimate. A detailed estimate contains the list of every work item with prices for labor, material, equipment necessary to complete that proposed work. Skills and knowledge of your estimator. Construction cost estimators have to have a good knowledge of construction systems in order to develop accurate and reliable cost estimates. Prices paid previously. That's the simplest way of reaching a detailed estimate is by comparing the proposed contract with an actual cost of a previous contract for similar work, as long as it's not too old. It should be then possible to compare the work statements, adjust for differences, and develop a new detailed estimate in relation to that old one. Contact with outside sources. Your driver THE must not request cost information from potential contractors when you're trying to develop that cost estimate. Any organization that's asked to supply such information is actually going to know what procurement is planned, and they'll have to that extent basically a competitive advantage. HUD Form 92326 is included in the appendix document for project cost estimates. So developing it, step one, divide your work logically into tasks or phases of work. Step two is estimate your total number of labor hours by the level of expertise, senior, junior technicians needed for each task and phase. Step three, estimate other direct cost items, computer time, things like that. Four is your estimate your travel, your per diem by identifying destinations, number of personnel involved, anticipated number of trips. Five, estimate indirect cost rates, overhead, fringe benefits, and then the last one is your estimate your profit and your fee. So you have to determine what type of contract you're going to have, what type of contract type. This is the water, that's Canada. That's how far away we are from it. This is pretty much our shore. These are 1,000-footers that go up and down. We can hear, I can lay in bed and hear the diesel on these things. They're pretty cool to watch though. Sometimes you can look out there and see 4 at a time. So determining the contract type determines the contract pricing arrangement. The two types of contracts most frequently used are fixed price and cost reimbursement. A fixed price contract. Under a fixed price contract, the price of supplies and services being procured is established at the outset of the contract. The price is not subject to any adjustments based on the contractor's actual cost during contract performance, unless such adjustment is authorized within that contract. The contractor must perform the contract requirements for the price agreed upon, regardless of actual cost incurred. Any cost incurred over and above that price are the contractor's sole responsibility. It's the contractor who assumes the risk of a successful performance and cost control. Fixed price contracts are used when it's required to deliver a product that conforms to the specifications or the completion of specific tasks before payment is made. Fixed price contracts are usually awarded using our sealed bidding method. Cost reimbursement contracts are used when the statement of work cannot be described or it's cost estimated with any reasonable degree of certainty. Under a cost reimbursement contract, payment could be made to the contractor for all reasonable, allocable, and allowable cost incurred in performance to the extent allowed in the contract. The contractor will be reimbursed for its best efforts up to the cost limitation set forth in the contract in meeting the contractor's performance objectives and delivery dates. That type of contract places maximum responsibility on the contracting officer to monitor performance to ensure that the contractor stays within budget and time constraints. You should try to avoid cost reimbursement contracts. Cost reimbursement contracts are awarded using the competitive proposal method. I shouldn't say try to, just be careful. Comparison of the two. A definite design or performance specifications are available in a fixed price contract. Fair and reasonable prices can be estimated and used as the cost estimate prior to solicitation. Risks of cost and performance is assumed by the contractor, and it's usually accomplished using a sealed bidding method. Cost reimbursement contract, there is a need to provide the contractor with technical direction during the performance of that contract. The uncertainties involved in contract performance do not permit costs to be estimated with sufficient accuracy to use a fixed price contract, and you have to use a competitive proposal method. Now, time and materials contract, and this is the one that I shouldn't have said that about that other contract. That it takes more diligence. This is the one that you really have to be careful with. This type is only used after determination that no other contract is suitable, and the contract includes a ceiling price, and the contractor can exceed it basically at its own risk. Time and material contracts mean that direct labor hours at a fixed hourly rate that reflect wages, general administrative expenses, and profit, and the contractor's actual materials cost. A time and materials contract provides no positive profit incentive to the contractor for cost control or labor efficiency. And as a result, you have to assert a higher degree of oversight in this type of a contract in order to ensure that the contractor is using efficient methods and effective cost controls. So this is the one that you have to really try not to get into. Prohibited contract types, and there are, any type of a contract that allows for the contractor to be paid a profit based on a percentage of its cost is prohibited. Typically, those are called cost plus percentage of a cost contract. In that type of a contract, there's no incentive for the contractor to keep costs down at all. In fact, there's an incentive for the contractor to inflate its cost, because the higher the contractor's cost, the higher its profits will be. So we're not allowed to enter in that type of contracting. So developing the request for contract. You as a recipient should develop a contract request form to initiate each procurement action. Contents of that request, the subject title of the requested goods or services, whether the request is competitive or non-competitive, whether that request is for a new requirement or a modification to an existing contract, indication by finance or your accounting office that the funds are available, the maximum dollar amount of the proposed contract or that modification, the estimated quantity of goods and the services being requested, the name, office, and telephone number of your assigned contracting officer or the representative, and whether that procurement is included in your annual procurement plan. your detailed statement of work, your SOW and your specifications, your proposed duration of that contract or modification, recommended contract type. It's going to be fixed price, cost reimbursement, factors for that award, evaluation criteria, evaluation plan, justification for not providing Indian preference when appropriate, suggested sources if known, special instruction if any, required management, concurrences, and approval. So now we're getting into the procurement clause, the methods of procurement. They're found under 2 CFR 200-320. Yep, there's our clause. Micro purchases, no quotations, equitable distributions, 10,000. Your small purchasing up to 250,000. Rate quotations, no cost or price analysis needed. We're going to sealed bid, 250,000 or more. Construction projects, price is a major factor. Competitive proposals, fixed price or cost reimbursement. You're going to do a request for proposal with evaluation methods, and sole sourcing, unique. It's got to be a public emergency if you're going to sole source something, pretty much authorized by HUD, and there's no competition available. Not just no competition. So your methods of procurement: micro purchasing, small purchasing, sealed bid purchasing, competitive proposals, and non-competitive. A micro purchase, if the price is considered reasonable, no competitive solicitation required. If that price does not exceed $2,000 for a procurement where Davis-Bacon would enter, a labor contract, basically. $10,000 for all other procurement using federal funds, or less if stated within your policy. Now, this is, remember, go back. If you haven't updated your policy since these thresholds were raised, you have to follow the ones that you had listed from a long time ago that were a lot smaller. Your procurement officer has to determine that that price is reasonable, and that they have to document the price on a requisition, purchase order, or a contract. Small purchasing, not more than the simplified acquisition threshold, which is right now up to 250,000. Relatively simple and informal procurements for securing services, supplies, other properties, as long as they don't cost more than that simple acquisition threshold. Competitive sealed bids for purchases over 250,000. It requires formal advertising. It requires that your specifications be, we talked about writing them clearly, completely, concisely. That award is based on your lowest bid submitted by a responsive and responsible bidder, and we'll talk about that at one point. You have to make sure that they're both, and you can not take their bid if they're not. Competitive proposal, purchases over 250,000 for services, an RFP, your request for proposals, procurement of supplies, services without using sealed bid method. Offers are evaluated against stated criteria. The award is made to the most advantageous offerer, with price and other factors being considered, not necessarily the low bidder. What are they offering you? Everything that you've asked for. Non-competitive proposals. The change, you must ask HUD in writing if you're going to accept non-competitive proposals. Procurement of supplies and services through solicitation of a proposal from only one source. So this is your sole sourcing when you need that HUD approval. When the public need or an emergency for the services or supplies will not permit a delay resulting from competitive solicitation. I don't have time, if my furnace goes down in the housing office in this type of temperature, to put something out for 14 days. I would lose the water, flood the building, certain times like that, it's an emergency. When the whole thing needs to be replaced, there's certain items. You call up the HUD office and you say, hey, it's 20 below. I can't put this thing out for bids. May I please procure this way? When the public need or emergency for the services or supplies will not permit a delay resulting for that competitive solicitation. When the federal awarding agency or pass-through entity, HUD, approves the procurement from one source. Like I said, you have to get a hold of them. After that solicitation of a number of sources, competition is deemed to be inadequate. As those of you that were here yesterday, when I tried to put out a bid, nobody in the Upper Peninsula did it. And nobody from the Lower Peninsula wanted to come up this far, to give you service of that small of an amount. So, methods of procurement based on price, less than 10,000, micro purchase, no solicitation required. Your price has to be reasonable. Just because you don't have to bid something out doesn't mean that you can pay an exorbitant amount. You have to, you're still procuring properly. 10,000 to 250,000 small purchases. You have to obtain an adequate number of solicitations, more than one. I always say 3. That used to be my, get me 3, get me a minimum of 3. Sealed bids, preferred for construction, competitive proposals, used when sealed bids are not, appropriate. The procurement threshold changes. I think this program guidance is in the appendix. Read this. This is when these thresholds went up. In 2019, if your procurement policy has not been updated since March of 2019, you need to update your procurement policy if you want to use these higher thresholds. If you get nothing out of that, get that part. The changes in those thresholds across all the federal programs, the micro purchase thresholds moved from 3,500 to 10,000. So that's what yours would have probably been. The simple acquisition threshold moved from 100,000 to 250,000. That's quite a bit of a difference. That's why I want you to check your procurement policy. The de minimis exception may continue to stay under 5,000. Informal purchasing acceptable, but price or rate quotes are required. Go to 288 and 200, 320. Like I said, if nothing else, learn how to use those 3 documents too. Recipients of HUD funding should update your procurement policies and procedures to reflect changes in the micro purchase and simple acquisition thresholds. The changes, like I said, I just told you all the ones with the Indian Housing Block Grant. Micro purchase 10,000, de minimis procurement exception remains at 5,000. Tribal preference applies to micro purchases. Tribal preference does not apply to de minimis procurements. Simplified acquisition thresholds move to 250,000. Now, when we get into the Indian Community Development Block Grant, which a lot of our housing entities still administer, if you don't, ask your tribe if you can compete on a, ours used to rotate. They'd let the housing authority do it 1 year, the tribe would do it 1 year. Micro purchase threshold of 10,000 applies to all non-construction contracts and activities. Micro purchase threshold for construction contracts remains at 2,000. Simplified acquisition threshold expanded to 250,000 for non-construction contracts and activities. The de minimis exemption for procurement of goods and services, notwithstanding any other provision of law, a recipient shall not be required to act in accordance with any otherwise applicable competitive procurement rule or procedure with respect to the procurement using a grant provided under this act for goods and services, the value of which is less than 5,000. For acquisitions, for construction, subject to Davis-Bacon. Remember Davis-Bacon, whenever you're dealing with that, it's got a $2,000 limit. So the point at which something begins or changes, so these are your thresholds here. 250,000, 2,000 for your Davis-Bacon, 100,000 and 10. This is a HUD methods of procurement comparison chart. micro purchases, where you should be obtaining bids, awarding contracts, prove cost reasonableness, your independent cost analysis, wage rates, required HUD forms, checklist or parties. I think this comparison chart is in your appendix also. If not, you can get it right off of the form. This is another one you should use with your self-monitoring. Remember, you guys are supposed to be self-monitoring. Well, how are you going to self-monitor your procurement? There's a couple of forms that I threw in here. So if you do it throughout the year, when it gets ready for the APR to go in and your executive director says, hey, I need some self-monitoring. Can you check? You can say, it's already done. Here's the form. So are any grant funds available to fund the proposed contract? Has a market survey been conducted and documented to determine if there's contractors available to satisfy that requirement? Have in-house delegations been made for grantee contractual responsibilities? You got your administrative team, you got your technical and your project. Have you determined the procurement method? You're going to use small purchase, competitive sealed bidding, negotiation, sole source contracting. Has a statement of work been developed? Statement of work for a negotiated contract. Is the contract to be competitively negotiated? Have evaluation criteria been developed? And it made me jump anyway. That's my warning, guys. If the contract is to be negotiated on a sole source basis, has a sole source justification been prepared? And holy, I was close. So this is a see you tomorrow, same place, same time thing. Questions. If I can't answer your question immediately, because if there's something that I don't know or would worry about, I will get back to you with an answer.
We do have a
And
question.
thank you guys. Okay, hold on. I gotta switch my screen. There's that, and then I gotta. Sorry.
We do have some questions in the chat. So
Yeah, I am trying to find the chat, my girl. Hold on.
I'm going to tell them to you. So
oh, you're gonna tell them.
Says, yes. The first one says, how does ICE work when using force account?
Find out who asked that question.
Miss Deborah Whitefoot.
It figures. Deborah. I'm going to get back to you with an answer, okay?
Okay. Thank you, Cheryl.
You're welcome, my girl. I would have
Okay.
bet money that she was behind that.
The next question
you have another one, my girl?
Yes, we have 3 more. It says, can you give an example of when a reimbursement contract would be used?
A reimbursement contract. No, I can't, but I will find out one.
Okay, thank you.
So there, I finally found it. Okay.
Oh. If you join us, Susan, you'll be able to maybe catch that answer in the next couple of days. Ms. Deborah also asked, what about when there is a tribal wage rate versus Davis-Bacon?
The tribal wage rate applies, but you still have to watch your thresholds. But and it has to be legally adopted to follow your tribal wage rates. It also your tribal wage rates also affect your Section 3 reporting, like on your APR. So we're going to get into that one in like 2 days.
Okay, and then the last question was, what is the difference between micro and de minimis?
De minimis.
Yes.
I wonder if I can go back and show you. It's easier.
Do you want me to stop sharing?
Is that your last one?
No.
Okay.
Oh, the last question? Yes, that's the last question.
Okay. Yes. Can I go back to me?
Of course.
Either that or I could grab my thing.
There you go.
Well, I went back too far. And for the rest of you guys that already know that question, we're done for the day.
And if we're done, please do take a moment to complete the survey. I did plug it into the chat. Let us know how we're doing, and give us that valuable feedback. So thank you for joining us, but do please complete that survey before you hop off.
So your micro purchases are less than 10,000.
We can't see, you're not sharing.
Ah, darn it. And the de minimis is a pain in the butt, and you have to be careful with it because you will get a finding if you play with the de minimis wrong or you don't list it. I'm going to try to grab something else rather than share them real quick. Because I just had, as I was saying, I work with tribes sometimes fixing things, and that was one of their findings. Procurement by micro purchase is the acquisition of supplies or services, the aggregate dollar amount which does not exceed the micro purchase threshold. To the extent practicable, the non-federal entity must distribute micro purchases equitably among qualified suppliers. Micro purchases may be awarded without soliciting competitive quotations if you consider the price to be reasonable. Where's the de minimis? Because that's what they got tagged on. Here it is. There's often confusion with the terms de minimis procurement and micro purchase procurement. A micro purchase is any procurement not exceeding 10,000. What the deal is if you have to apply Indian preference or not. There's exceptions restricted to de minimis procurements. Those that are less than 5,000. The effect of this confusion can be discouraging to Indian-owned enterprises from participating in potential procurement opportunities. So, I had that too because I think that's in tomorrow's slides. I can't show you because I can't get in there tomorrow. Who asked that question? Because it's answered tomorrow.
That question came from Miss Susan Flores.
Susan Forrest?
Flores.
Yes. Okay. Miss Susan Flores, I will give you, if it's not in tomorrow's, I will make a complete slide on that. I don't want to repeat it wrong because it has to do with the Indian preference requirement.
Dana says, for master contracts that were entered into by sole source method, are you only able to create, wait. Are you only able to create task orders / purchase orders from that contract under the micro purchase threshold? Eric answered and said yes, but Cheryl, what are your thoughts?
If it's sole sourcing, that brings a whole different set of complications into it. But yes. But yeah, so okay, so I've got Susan's tomorrow.
Yes.
I have ICE and Force account, and I have reimbursement contract example. which we will have tomorrow for all 3.
Perfect.
Okay?
Yes,
You
ma'am.
guys have a wonderful day. Will we be back tomorrow, same time?
Well, everybody, again, thank you for joining us. Please do complete the survey. I put the link in the chat and I will be emailing that to you guys. And this training is going all the way till December 3rd, this Friday. So please make sure to join us. And I've had some of you ask me, yes, this recording and all recordings are going to be available on our YouTube channel. So Dana, we start at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every single day. So you will be able to access this recording and every other recording on our YouTube channel, ideally by the end of the week, if not by next week. And please do check out all of our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Twitter, and our Hobo Thing of Podcast on Simplecast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Once again, thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to respond.
That's when you sound like a NASCAR driver.